What if the only thing standing between you and your future is someone else's opinion? You have ideas, you have desires, you even have a plan. But then you pause, you hesitate, you wonder, what will they think? And just like that, your momentum dies. Not because your dream was wrong, but because your fear of criticism was louder than your decision. Let me be brutally clear, you will never build anything legendary while trying to be liked. I've seen men with million-dollar visions fold at the first sarcastic comment. I've watched leaders abandon their genius because a stranger raised an eyebrow. And I've seen brilliance rot in silence because someone was afraid to look crazy. That's why I wrote, put your foot upon the neck of the fear of criticism by reaching a decision not to worry about what other people think, do, or say. Because until you decide that their opinion means nothing, you will continue to live a life that means nothing to you. So I ask you, whose voice is still louder than your calling? And more importantly, when will you silence it? Let me introduce you to a man whose mind was a cathedral, but whose voice never echoed through it. His name was Ellis Grant. He was not poor. He was not uneducated. He was not unloved. But Ellis lived under a silent tyrant, one whose chains made no noise and left no visible scars. That tyrant was the fear of criticism. And like most people ruled by this fear, Ellis didn't know he was a prisoner. Not at first. Ellis was brilliant. From an early age, he could deconstruct ideas, reverse engineer systems, and forecast outcomes with astonishing accuracy. He read philosophy for fun. He solved business cases in his sleep. He had a journal filled with inventions, market theories, and quotes from obscure thinkers most people couldn't pronounce. But what he didn't have was a voice. At least not one he used. You see, Ellis had learned something very early in life. If you speak up, you risk being laughed at. If you act different, they'll call you arrogant. If you fail in front of them, you'll never be respected again. So he kept his ideas quiet. He nodded when he disagreed. He buried his innovations. And when opportunities to lead arose, he politely declined. He told himself it was strategy, but deep down, it was submission. Not to truth, to approval. I have seen thousands of Ellis Grants, men and women with minds like gold mines, buried beneath fear of being seen, not fear of failure, no, but fear of being judged by small minds while reaching for a bigger life. It's one of the most dangerous fears in the human psyche because it masquerades as caution, humility, or even wisdom. But let me make it plain. If you do not declare who you are, others will define you by default, and their version of you will always be smaller than the truth. Ellis's turning point came during a seminar in Chicago. Not the content, he'd heard it all before, but the speaker asked a question that shattered him. What have you been disowning in yourself just to be accepted by people who don't even know their own name? It hit him like a freight train. He realized that for years he hadn't been living. He had been editing himself into acceptability. His resume looked polished. His clothes were tailored. His voice was calm and agreeable. But none of it was real. Ellis Grant, the man, had become a curated illusion, one optimized for applause, not for authenticity. And that's when he saw it. The fear of criticism wasn't protecting him. It was preventing him. He went home and pulled out his old journals. He stared at the inventions, the market theories, the books half-written and never shared, and he felt it. Not shame, but rage. Rage at the years stolen by silence. Rage at the people whose imaginary opinions had muted his genius. Rage at himself for giving that power away. But in that rage, something ancient awakened. Decision, not emotion, not motivation, but that sacred moment when a man stops asking permission and claims his birthright. Ellis stood in front of his mirror and said out loud, "They don't get a vote anymore." He started small, one post on LinkedIn, sharing a radical business idea, then a podcast interview where he spoke without filtering, then a keynote address at a tech summit. His voice shaky at first, then roaring. He received criticism, of course. Some said he was too blunt. Some said he wasn't qualified. Some rolled their eyes and whispered behind his back. But none of it mattered, because none of it stopped him. And that was the difference. Ellis Grant became not just a thought leader, but a thought liberator. He launched his own think tank. He mentored young innovators on how to speak with backbone. He started a movement called Unfiltered Brilliance, and he tattooed these words on his forearm: "They don't get a vote." That is what I meant when I wrote, "Put your foot upon the neck of the fear of criticism by reaching a decision not to worry about what other people think, do, or say." Because here's the truth: you cannot build greatness while fearing gossip. You cannot write your vision in fire. While afraid of the smoke it will create. And you cannot serve your mission while bowing to the moods of strangers. So I ask you, whose opinion have you been exalting above your own? What part of your voice have you been silencing to stay safe? And how many years are you willing to trade and for someone else's approval? Because if you don't crush this fear now, it will calcify into a personality. And one day you'll call it who you are. But it was never you, it was them. Let this be your Ellis moment. Let this be the day you decide. You don't owe them agreement. You don't owe them silence. You owe yourself freedom. Let me tell you something few will admit. Most men are not prisoners of the world. They are prisoners of their own reflection. They look into the mirror and do not see themselves. They see what the world has told them to see. And that, my friend, is the most dangerous kind of prison, a man locked inside his mind by opinions that were never his. The fear of criticism does not begin with others. It begins with you repeating them to yourself. Let me tell you about a man I once interviewed, Paul Fenwick, a decorated war veteran, a logistics officer turned entrepreneur, a man who had faced death on foreign soil, but trembled when it came time to launch his own voice. Paul had spent years developing a product to help veterans reintegrate into civilian life. It was brilliant, practical, market-tested, needed, but every time he came close to releasing it, he froze. Why? Not because it wasn't ready, not because he doubted the product, but because he feared what his old colleagues might think, what his former superior officers would say, what LinkedIn would whisper. He told himself, "I don't want to be seen as self-promoting. I don't want to be ridiculed if it fails. What if I embarrass the uniform?" None of these were facts. All of them were phantoms, but phantoms, when fed, grow teeth. And Paul had been feeding them for years. He was no longer haunted by other people. He was haunted by his internal repetition of what others might think. That is the true tyranny of criticism. You don't need the crowd to silence you. You'll do it yourself. Paul described his inner world as a courtroom. Every new idea had to stand trial. The jury? Ghosts of teachers, parents, colleagues, anonymous critics online. He would play out conversations in his head. What would they say if I wrote this post? Would my mentor disapprove if I pivoted careers? Will my old boss think I'm going soft? He lived in what I call preemptive rejection. He rejected himself so the world wouldn't have to. But when you live like that, you're never really free. You're just maintaining a version of yourself you think the world can tolerate. That's not life. That's emotional captivity. The fear of criticism often disguises itself as wisdom, as practicality, as humility. But humility does not shrink your truth. It elevates others without erasing you. Paul eventually realized something brutal. He had outsourced his confidence to the ghost voices in his head. He had deferred decisions to imaginary panels. He had robbed his family of his full potential, all to satisfy the rules of an audience that no longer existed. And so one day, he did something radical. He wrote every fear on a piece of paper. Every line began with, "I am afraid they will think." It was 2 full pages. Then he took a red pen and line by line asked, "Who is they?" Half the names were faceless. Some were dead. Some were from high school. And he realized he had been carrying specters of critics for decades. Not real people, just outdated echoes. Paul did not slay the fear in one day. He did it one decision at a time. He launched the product. He gave talks. He was called a fraud once. and survived. He was mocked by a forum and grew stronger. The more he acted, the smaller the voices became, not because the world changed, but because his mind did. He learned what I taught long ago. When defeat comes, accept it as a signal that your plans are not sound, rebuild those plans, and set sail once more toward your coveted goal. That applies to fear as well. When fear speaks, do not argue with it. Outgrow it, because the only voice that should shape your destiny is your own. Let me ask you, who lives in your mirror? Whose opinion is still holding a veto power over your dreams? And what would you dare to do if you truly stopped asking for permission? If the answer stirs you, then don't just nod. Decide. You don't need to fight the world. Just stop fighting yourself. Because the most dangerous thing about fear of criticism isn't what it takes from you. It's what it convinces you to never become. And that, my dear friend, must end today. There comes a time when the soul grows weary of asking for permission, when the spirit, battered by criticism, no longer craves applause, but silence, a silence in which only truth speaks. Let me tell you a story. His name was Raphael, an architect by training, but a creator by heart. For decades he designed what others asked of him: towers, hospitals, banks, always pragmatic, always approved, always safe. But one night, during a particularly brutal rainstorm, Raphael returned home, drenched and broken, not by weather, but by a realization. He had built monuments for others, and never once created something that reflected his soul. He sat alone in his studio, the wind howling outside, and he drew, not blueprints, not specs, visions. A circular library shaped like a spiral galaxy, a chapel made entirely of mirrors, a school in the shape of a question mark. They were bizarre, they were beautiful, and they were his, and he never showed them to anyone. Why? Because the ghost of criticism still whispered, too strange, too impractical, too much, and so Raphael buried them. Until one day, his granddaughter found the sketches. She cried, "Why did you never build this?" And Raphael, with trembling lips, replied, "Because I feared what people might say," she said. "But they were never going to say anything. You never gave them the chance." That night, he framed his spiral galaxy library and hung it on the wall, not for approval, but as an act of resistance. Because true revolution begins not on the battlefield, but in the mirror. When you fear criticism, you divide your life in two: the self you live and the self you hide. This split creates psychic hemorrhage, a slow bleeding of vitality. You smile where you wish to speak. You obey where you wish to rebel. You shrink where you were made to rise. And slowly, over years, your power is traded, not stolen, but given away. Criticism is a language, one we're taught to understand before we ever learn to speak truth. At 5 years old, don't be weird. At 10, that's not ladylike. At 15, no one likes people who brag. At 25, play it safe. And by 35, we forget there was ever a version of us who dared to shout, run, dance, question, disrupt. The mind, like any animal trained with enough pain, becomes obedient to its captor. But here's the truth. That captor never existed. It was a projection, a phantom made real by repetition, and once seen clearly, it begins to dissolve. Freedom begins not with courage, but with clarity. Raphael's breakthrough didn't come when he built something. It came when he framed what he feared, when he turned his shame into art, when he gave his hidden self walls to speak from. You must do the same. You don't need to shout from rooftops. You only need to live so fully that the lie no longer fits. Wear what feels true. Speak what feels dangerous. Create what others might mock. Because criticism has no power in the presence of authentic conviction. And that is what you were born with, before the world taught you otherwise. So reclaim it. Because the truth is, you do not escape criticism by hiding. You escape by outgrowing the part of you that still needs permission. There is a final evolution in the mind of the man who no longer fears criticism. He learns to use it. like a sailor learns to read the wind. He no longer bends to judgment. He lets it shape his direction without altering his conviction. Let me introduce you to Camila. She was a software developer in a male-dominated industry, quiet, brilliant, consistently overlooked. Every idea she offered was picked apart, not because it lacked merit, but because she lacked status. She once spent 4 months preparing a presentation for her firm's board. It was dismissed within 5 minutes. A week later, a male colleague repackaged the same ideas, slightly renamed, slightly repitched. He was praised, promoted. Camilla broke down, but not in front of them. She went home and stared at the blank wall of her apartment. It was her mirror. She whispered, "They don't want me to rise." But a deeper voice answered, "Then rise so high they can't ignore you, even if they pretend not to see." And so she built something outside their structure, a platform for women in tech to share their unfiltered innovations. No gatekeepers, no panels, no permissions. It exploded. Within 2 years, companies began recruiting from her platform, the same companies that once silenced her. When asked how she kept going despite the dismissal, she said, "I turned criticism into coordinates. Wherever they said, 'You don't belong,' I walked straight into that space and made it mine." When you rewire your relationship with criticism, you become a different species. You no longer seek the spotlight. You become light. You no longer chase applause. You create impact so undeniable, it echoes without claps. And when someone says, "Who do you think you are?" you smile, not in arrogance, but in knowing exactly who I was born to be. You walk into boardrooms, classrooms, platforms, and families, not with defiance, but with unshakable truth. Because the storm no longer rages around you, it rages within you, and it is the fuel that drives your personal empire. You see now, criticism was never your enemy. It was your initiation. Every mocking voice, every backhanded compliment, every ghost of "you're not enough." They were not obstacles. They were teachers, painful, necessary, relentless, but ultimately powerless. The moment you stopped obeying, you have broken the cycle, not by avoiding judgment, but by rising so fully. Nothing outside you can define what's inside you. That is the immovable self, and it was waiting for you all along. If you have arrived here, you are unlike the rest, not because you were born with some rare gift, nor because you are more fortunate than others, but because you chose to endure. Yes, endure. Endure the discomfort of facing yourself. Endure the pain of shedding illusions. Endure the silence that follows when you no longer need the world's applause. Most people never make it this far, not because they lack intelligence, but because they fear truth. You, however, have proved that your hunger for liberation is stronger than your addiction to comfort. Let me remind you of something sacred. The greatest transformations are never seen on stages. They occur in the shadows, when no one is clapping, when no one is watching, when no one is cheering. You've been walking through that shadow, and now you emerge luminous, not because I said so, but because you feel it. You've broken free from the need to be liked, from the script written by other people's fears, from the cage disguised as approval. This is no small thing. For centuries, the fear of criticism has been one of mankind's greatest prisons. It silences brilliance, it distorts beauty, it edits genius. But you have dared to become the editor of your own life. You now hold the pen. And you know what that means? The world will resist, not because you are wrong, but because you are free. And freedom threatens every system built on obedience. So expect resistance, expect criticism, but never expect defeat. Because when the mind is governed by inner authority, the outer world loses its grip. Let's speak plainly. You are part of a rare class of people, those who turn content into commitment, those who turn words into weapons, those who turn insights into irreversible transformation. And this is only the beginning. You've just walked through a mental initiation. What lies ahead is application, embodiment, mastery. So I'll ask you now, have you subscribed to this channel? Have you activated notifications so that you are equipped with the next piece of truth when it arrives? Because this is not entertainment. This is architecture, mental architecture, soul structure. And each video, each lesson, each revelation is a new brick in the foundation of your unshakable self. You may not feel ready. That's normal. Most revolutions feel awkward in the beginning, like wearing armor that doesn't fit, but it will. You will grow into it. You will become the kind of person who speaks when others stay silent, acts when others seek permission, creates when others criticize, leads when others wait. And your life, yes, your actual life, will begin to reflect this. People will notice. They may not understand, but they will feel the shift. Some will admire. Some will mock. Some will distance themselves. Let them, because your evolution is not a democracy. It is a decision, one that you've already made by staying here, by absorbing this message, by not clicking away. And now I ask you, what if every piece of criticism you've ever feared was just a test to see if you were willing to shrink for approval or expand into your purpose? You have passed, and now your path begins, not in theory, in practice, in movement, in visibility. Let your voice be heard, let your truth take form, let your presence be felt so fiercely that the old version of you no longer recognizes the new. We're building something here, not a community, a coalition of thinkers, of doers, of liberated minds, and we want you with us. So before you go, subscribe. Turn on notifications. Share this with someone you know is ready to wake up. This is not about virality, it's about victory. And victory, my friend, is not loud. It is consistent. It is quiet confidence. It is the daily decision to never again live on someone else's terms. So go, not to escape, but to build. You are the few. You are the flame. You are the force they never saw coming. And I'll be right here every step of the way. You are walking a path few ever complete. You have crossed the forest of judgment. You have burned the scripts handed to you. You have faced the voice in the mirror and answered with your own. And now, I ask, have you subscribed to this channel? Have you turned on notifications? Because this is not content. It is consciousness training. And if this spoke to your core, you belong here. Let others follow likes. You follow liberation. Until the next revelation, walk boldly, walk freely, and walk as if you were never meant to crawl.